everyone, and welcome again to a special edition of the Musical Innertube. I'm Don Rooney.
And I'm a special edition of John Timpane.
He is. This is the 50th time we've come to you here on the Musical Innertube, and because it's the 50th episode, we thought we would take a second to look back on all of the conversations that we've had over the previous 49 episodes and sort of reflect on the people that we've talked to and the interesting topics that we've covered. Isn't that right, John?
Yeah, and I think that second is just about over. So goodbye, everybody, and thanks for thanks for tuning in. No, seriously, I was thinking about this as we were putting this show together. You get a chance to see where we've been in 50 episodes. I mean, it's amazing, Don, that we've made it to 50.
Yeah, and it's a wide variety of people, too. We just wanted to talk to interesting people about interesting things that they've done in their lives. Some people have interesting occupations. Some have interesting hobbies, and I think we've covered the gamut. We've done some real constructive and serious stuff, and we've also just talked to people on a lark about goofy stuff that they've done. So, John, why don't you start us off and recall one of your favorite episodes?
On September 11th of this year, our old radio pal Mike Hinkson hopped aboard to talk about his experience on 9/11 itself, when a jet airliner crashed into his building, Tower 1, at the World Trade Center, where his office was. And Michael is blind, and his guide dog, Roselle, led him down more than 78 flights of stairs to safety. So Michael vividly sets the stage for us as people make their way in the dark, and a lot of them don't know what has happened. Nobody knows really what has happened in detail. They know perhaps that a plane has hit the building. They could smell plane fuel. They can, and there's all sorts of things that happen. And Michael talks about how the crowd helps one another and bucks everybody up. And he also shows how at certain points, different people were just overwhelmed by what was happening psychologically and thought they couldn't go on. And all through it, Roselle, with steely resolve, and this is Michael's guide dog again, gets him to the bottom. So let's listen to Michael.
We had burn victims pass us going down. You probably heard about a woman who was right in front of an elevator when a cloud of fuel vapor ignited, and it burned her. And I think she was one of the ones who passed us. But we had burn victims pass us, and then a woman near us on the stairs stopped and said, "I can't go on." And literally, we surrounded her and had a group hug and just said, "Come on, you can do it." Roselle was giving her kisses, and we were able to keep her going down the stairs.
That's so was that a psychological moment for her or a physical moment that she just couldn't continue going down the stairs?
It was more psychological.
And so to paint the picture, I mean, you are now physically going down the stairs step by step, one hand on the railing, one hand holding Roselle's leash. Were people generally orderly as far as you could tell?
Yes. Yeah. There were a couple of times that people started to lose it a bit, like at the 50th floor, David did. He suddenly said, "Mike, we're going to die. We're not going to make it out of here." And of course, as I said earlier, I took the courses and got a secondary teaching credential. And there's a secret course that they have for budding teachers that they don't tell you about. It's the class that's titled Yelling at Students 101. And so I had to. So not really a true class. But as soon as David said that, I just said in as sharp a voice as I could, "Stop it, David. If Roselle and I can go down these stairs, so can you." And he told me later that brought him out of his funk. And but he wanted to do...
It's really too bad you didn't have a ruler to crack him on the knuckles with as well.
Well, I was holding Roselle's harness, so I couldn't get to my ruler.
Okay.
So I said that, and David then told me, okay, I'm okay now. And what he wanted to do was something that would take his mind off of all of it. So he said, "I'm going to walk a floor below you and start shouting up to you everything that I see on the stairs." And I will tell you that I think that's one of the most incredible events that I experienced that day. So why? Well, we're going down the stairs. I'm on like the 49th floor now, and he's at 48. He's going, "Mike, I'm at the 48th floor. Everything is good here. Going on down." I'm up on the 49th floor. "Good girl, Roselle. Keep going forward," and really encouraging her and speaking to let her know I was okay. Because if I started to sound nervous, she's going to be looking at me and not focusing as well as she should. So it was important for me to be calm and focus on her. That's the team effort that we both make and made then that helped each other. But then I get to 48 and David, 47th floor, all good here. So why do I think what David did was so great? Because in reality, he became a focal point for anyone who could hear him, above him or below him. They would hear him, Mike, 46th floor, all is good here. And they knew somewhere on the stairs there was somebody who was sounding okay. And I know that he kept thousands of people calm just by doing what he did, which I think was really cool. And it's one of the most incredible experiences I had that day. It took me a while to figure out why I thought that was so important, because did I need him to tell me what was going on? No, because it wouldn't make a difference to me, but it helped him. But more important, it really did help so many other people on the stairs who heard him, above him, below him, people who couldn't see him, but they all knew somewhere there's somebody who's doing okay.
I mean, Don, you've met Michael, and we used to, when we were on radio with him, we used to have a lot of fun. Michael always, he was a brilliant guy, still is a very brilliant man. And of course, he's written a very popular book about Roselle and how Roselle brought him to safety. What is amazing to me is his description is totally in terms of the sound and the feeling of it, and also what people could smell and hear. Obviously, he has no visuals to give us, and yet we're right there. I feel as though I can smell the jet fuel. I feel as though I can hear people. I can almost smell the fear if you want. And it makes you think differently about that day. It really brings it back to not just in living color, but all the other senses.
And Mike has made a fairly decent living being a keynote speaker at various events, talking about this incident. And I think you're right. I think he is able to paint such a wonderful picture, especially since he is not limited by what he saw, but by all of his other senses working in coordination with one another to bring audiences in to that experience the way he brought you and I in. And I think that's a very valuable talent to have, and Mike has it in spades. Mike Hingson is, by the way, episode number 24, if you're keeping score.
Thank you.
And I'd like to talk about somebody who visited with us twice, episodes number 10 and 36, and that's Carl Parker, who's a meteorologist with the Weather Channel. And besides being an on-camera meteorologist and a severe weather expert at the Weather Channel, Carl's also focused on extreme weather. He talked to us in episode 10 mostly about hurricanes, but in both episodes he did talk about climate change. He completed some graduate work recently in that area, so now he's coordinating the Weather Channel's climate coverage. And Carl told us, especially in that second episode, episode 36, that this is an issue that's already changing the way that weather works, the way that people look at weather. And it's unfortunately, if we don't change the situation pretty rapidly, it's going to change the way the world works. Let's listen.
If you look at the latest IPCC report, there's this possibility that, maybe we could end up with 1.5 degrees of warming. That's going to be hard to do. We're at 1.07 right now. And in order to get to 1.5, we would have to really rapidly, substantially reduce our emissions. And it does not appear that we're on a trajectory to do that. So that is probably out. And it's too bad, because there was a report that came out just a few years ago that said that the difference between 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming and 2 degrees is really going to be remarkable. So, it looks like 2 degrees is where we're headed, but if we can manage to ramp up all these technologies, maybe we can keep it at 2. If we don't do a thing, then we're talking about maybe 3 or 4 degrees of warming. And, and that's the point at which, it's all, we can see what's going on with 1.07 degrees of warming. So just imagine what it would be like if it was, that much higher. And that's something that none of us really want to face.
Now, despite all that doom and gloom about climate change and rising temperatures, Carl says there is a way forward, and he talks about how that could be beneficial to everyone, including the economy.
One of my favorite stats is that at least several years ago, the amount of energy that the entire world needed at any moment in time, the constant energy demand was 18 terawatts. A terawatt is a trillion watts. So 18 trillion watts is what everybody needs all the time. And at the top of the atmosphere, the sun gives us 179,000. So I think I see a way out of this. It's incredible how much untapped potential there is in solar, in wind, in water. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And what's also remarkable about that is when you think about what happened in the late 90s, we had this incredible economic boom because we had an entirely new way of doing things with the internet. And when you have an entirely new way of doing things, that really gets the economy going. And if you're talking about an entirely new way of making energy, of storing it, of transporting it, distributing it, you're talking about a lot of different areas where you need people, you need, new jobs to make that happen. And you're talking about a lot of economic activity. So that's the part that I think gets missed in a lot of this. This is a huge opportunity for us to move into this realm. Not only is it going to make life easier for everybody in the long run, it probably would really juice the economy to do that. There have been a lot of studies that have shown that. And so I think there are just so many good reasons to move in that direction.
And John, I don't know about you, but climate change scares the snot out of me. And Carl actually was pretty level-headed in talking about it, laid out the facts very, very clearly, and talked about the fact that we're not done yet. We can still climb our way out of it and accommodate the world to the rising temperatures and accommodate the way we live. It just takes a little bit of oomph, which we don't seem to have right now.
Yeah, we don't seem to have. I have to tell you, Don, I mean, I've always been a science guy, but hearing this episode made it especially palpable and real to me. I mean, people keep asking, well, when is the apocalypse coming? I think we're there. I actually do.
I think so. And you can listen to Carl yourself on episodes 10 or 36 of the musical Innertube.
That's the thing. I mean, when we were doing this broadcast and selecting what we were going to choose, the whole question was, well, what do you leave out? And I wish there were so many. I mean, we had a great podcast on, the whole story around Bill Cosby. We had a great podcast with Jill Scherer Murray about her life coaching, which was
letting go.
Yeah, about letting go, which was quite wonderful. And this one, I think, was one of the high points for me. One of the 2 or 3 real high points of the year. This was in July. Episode 31 with Ron Brownstein. And if you recognize that name, that's because Ron is senior editor for The Atlantic and senior political analyst for CNN. So he's on CNN all the time. He's a longtime commentator on the political and cultural scene, just a tremendous writer. And his book, Rock Me on the Water, his recent book, is all about the huge cultural impact of the year 1974 and thereabouts, emanating from the music, film, and TV world in Los Angeles. For a long time, we used to talk about how LA drove this nation's culture and drove changes in the culture, and it seemed to come to a peak in the mid-'70s. He talks about that incredible year in the following excerpt, and what it was like to live far away in New York City, and yet to understand that something very special was going on. And you and I, Don, were there, as Ron so kindly points out. Let's listen.
I was writing this book during the Trump years, and then we were kind of finishing it during the pandemic. And it felt at times like a vacation to go spend time in 1974 LA. Obviously, there's a lot of work that goes into a book, but just like I remember thinking, like, wouldn't it be great to just kind of go through the hot tub time machine and kind of come out in the colony in 1974 under Ronstadt on Saturday night, because like they, people would talk about, Graham Nash said, when we went to somebody's house on Saturday night, we took our guitars, and everybody would sit around and play. And, it did, in addition to all of the cultural import that I write about, I mean, I think what I really try to convey in this book is that this was a lot of fun. And, to make a gross simplification, the men, when you interview men about kind of their story, they're all like brave Ulysses. They're out kind of, conquering the high seas, and they tell you about their victories and triumphs. And by and large, the women are much more likely to kind of think about how all of these pieces fit together and not just tell you their story, but kind of the group dynamic. And that was true for Linda Ronstadt on the music side. It was true for Linda Bloodworth Thomason on the TV side, because she worked with all of those. And then Angelica Houston in the movie side. But I was growing up in New York. These were years when New York was kind of spiraling into bankruptcy. And these were the years of Ford to New York.
Yeah.
Dead. I mean, Woody Allen may have been dripping with condescension for LA, but LA really wasn't looking to New York for validation. I mean, they kind of, people recognize, I don't think people fully understood the magnitude of how this was happening horizontally across all of these industries. I mean, the music people were focused on music, TV on TV, movies on movies. And they were somewhat aware of what a dynamic period it was in the other spheres as well. Mostly they were focused on their own, but people recognized in their own lanes that something special was going on. I mean, if you talk to whether it's Irving Azoff or Rob Reiner or Brooks or Lear, they all understood that, or the people, people in the movies at that time, they all understood that this was kind of a special period. And man, I hope I convey it in the book. It really would have been a lot of fun to be there. And you guys were, so
yes.
I tip my hat.
So toward the end of our episode with Ron Brownstein, the question came up. So does culture really have an effect on human life? Does a change in culture like the one you were describing, do you think that changed modern life in America? It's a huge question. And I can tell you, having been a lifetime academic for 17 years, that people argue all the time about this. A lot of people think culture doesn't really have much of an impact, doesn't really change things, can't really change things. And Ron had quite an interesting answer.
The early 1970s, whether it's All in the Family, Mary Tyler Moore, MASH, Maude, and all the other contemporary comedies, or all the great movies, The Godfathers, Chinatown, et cetera, or the music, the pop culture of the early 70s is when the critique of American life that emerged out of the social movements of the 1960s really became mainstream in our lives. And, again, it's the hardest part in history is to kind of understand what the context was in which something happened. But, it is very clear that before the early 1970s, those ideas were not making it into The Sound of Music and The Great Escape and, Beverly Hillbillies. And so that is that moment. Now, so that's the culture side. The culture side is all of these ideas become part of our mental architecture because they become part of our pop culture, and thus they change the way we live. I mean, the role of women in society, the role of Black people in society, the way in which we trusted or didn't what we heard from government or business, that changed and did not go back after the early 1970s.
I can't recommend Rock Me on the Water more highly. It's beautifully written. Ron couldn't write a bad sentence if he tried. It's really a gorgeous book to read. But also, even if you haven't heard the music or seen the films, it'll drive you back to them. And you'll get a taste of what was arising that hadn't existed before. Everything from Five Easy Pieces to Reds to, in different ways, Taxi Driver and to the TV experiment that just got started with All in the Family and Maude and shows like that. A lot of things were changing in those years, and we were pretty close to it. It was quite a ride.
Speaking of people who've had a ride, I wanted to point out a couple episodes we did with a woman named Julie McKelvey. And those are episodes 26 and 34. Julie McKelvey is a person who manages a franchise for a hearing aid company here in central Pennsylvania. But that's not what makes her interesting. What makes her interesting is she's attempting to climb the 7 tallest peaks, the tallest peak on every continent in the world. And so far, she's done 4. back in January, on January 3rd, as a matter of fact, she reached the summit of Mount Vinson, which is, get this, the highest point in Antarctica. So she was at the top of the bottom of the world, if you will. And before that, she'd climbed Kilimanjaro in Africa, Aconcagua in South America, and Elbrus in Europe. So she's done 4 of the 7. Now, she did try earlier last year to climb Denali, which some people know as Mount McKinley in Alaska, which is the tallest point in North America. But she injured herself during the training, and she wasn't able to make the climb. But she said she still learned something from that. And here's a little bit of that discussion we had with her.
We were about 8 days in, and I had not told my guide that I was injured. I hadn't told anybody that I was injured because to be honest, I didn't want anybody telling me I couldn't go. It's just the same reason I didn't get it x-rayed. Anyway, long story around all that. But the guide, I told him what had happened, and he's watching me try to maneuver my feet, and he knows what's coming ahead, which is the really difficult part on this upper mountain. And we had to make the call and turn around. And that was incredibly difficult. And so that guy probably saved my life because on the upper mountain that we were about to get to, there's this ridge and it's 2 feet wide, and it's a 5,000 foot drop on one side and a 3,000 foot on the other. And there's no room for error. Like you don't place your foot right. You can't turn your foot right. And you take not only yourself down, but you're tied to 2 other people on a rope. So it's not just my life that I would be putting in danger. It's the lives of other people. And, then I came home and, had my foot x-rayed and found out it was broken, and it was broken from the training fall. It was broken the entire time. So there's no way I could have made it up there. But in looking back and trying to process all of this, I know that it's a good thing for me, and I've learned an incredible amount. I don't regret any of it. I mean, I now know what that mountain is, and it is big and it is incredibly difficult. It's beautiful and it's all those things, but it's a beast, So when I go back there, I have that experience to draw from.
And the nice thing, John, about all these climbs is that she has donations. She set up donations for all these climbs that she's made so people can sort of pledge money for every mountain she climbs. And all that money goes to benefit those who need hearing aids and can't afford them. It's a really, really nice story.
Julie is one of these people who just decided to do something and trains herself to be a world athlete and commits herself to one of these crazy, quixotic quests to do something, literally because it's there, because it remains to be done, because it's something that is remarkable and unusual and is a test of bodily strength and mental strength. And
yeah, and one of the interesting things about following her climbs is that when she went to Mount Vinson in Antarctica, when she was training for that, she fell down and smashed her face on a rock. And she had to have some dental work done, and her lip is still all puffy and had stitches in it, and she climbed anyway.
Right.
So that, shows her strength and grit and determination.
And luckily, since they don't make you climb with your face, she could, it was just one more challenge.
Yeah.
Don, on December the 7th, experienced journalist and 2-time Pulitzer Prize winner David Zucchino came aboard the musical Innertube. His book, Wilmington's Lie, won the 2021 Pulitzer for Best Nonfiction. David takes us back to the 1898 uprising in Wilmington, North Carolina, one of the few times, chillingly, when citizens banded together to overthrow a local government. And it's only happened a couple of times in our history, and this was one. And it's very little known, which was one of the things we talked about. How come nobody knows that this ever happened? But it's a huge deal, and his book sorts out exactly how huge it was. It was a huge deal in sort of the revanchist movement against what had been unleashed by the Emancipation Proclamation, pulling back, trying to get back on a footing that was a lot more the way it was in the slavery South. And this uprising sort of reflected those things. And when we asked David to relate the events of 1899 to those of 2021, David drew a big hard line between that day and this, pulling no punches whatsoever.
No, what I really shocked me in doing the research for this book is how deep this wellspring of racism runs through American society. And it was very obvious. It was out there in 1898, and people called themselves white supremacists. The use of the N-word was shocking in newspaper editorials and newspaper articles and speeches. Racism was very evident. It was out there. It was a point of pride among whites to be racist. But this undercurrent has survived for more than 120 years, and I think it's been there. It's just a certain segment of the population that is full of rage and resentment against people of color, that their nation is under threat. And Donald Trump really made it okay to be racist, made it patriotic to be racist, and I think he brought out what had been there all this time. This undercurrent of racism that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, when he gutted the Voting Rights Act, removed the free clearance part of the act in 2013, essentially said, well, we're in a different society today, and there's really no more racism, and there's no more voter suppression of African Americans, so we don't need pre-clearance. And again, I think Donald Trump revealed that there is this strong undercurrent of racism and white nationalism, and it doesn't take much of a spark to unleash it, as we saw on January 6th.
You can see that David's point, and he's not really being political. He's really talking about history right now, and he wants us to think about how those things can happen at any time. They can happen here in the United States, and all the stuff that we thought would never happen, it seems to come back around. And especially with the race thing, which we haven't solved in this country, you never know how that's going to rear its ugly head once again in American life.
There was one wonderful discussion that we had. She's our all-time champ in downloads on YouTube. She has had more than 1,200 views on YouTube.
That's a lot for us.
Which is way far and above any other views that we've had for any of our other discussions. She is voiceover artist Christina Puccelli, and here's a little bit of what she does.
Okay, so I play Luann in The Loud House, and she's a jokester. She tells puns and jokes. She's 14 years old, and so she'd say, "Hey, Lincoln, what do you call an old snowman? Water." Get it?
Now, you also do voices for video games. How is that different from doing voices for animation?
They're a lot more physical. So you're fighting and dying and running. I mean, you do all that in animation as well, but you're not dying. They wouldn't kill off a kid because that would be traumatic, right?
Not recommended.
Yeah, sometimes I audition from home, and right now I'm also recording for broadcast from home because of the pandemic. But I have to tell my neighbors, I'm like, look, sometimes I'm going to be auditioning for a video game. So if you hear me screaming or yelling, he's got a gun or shoot, or, like sometimes they're like, oh, she's being burned alive. And I'm like, if you hear something like that, just know I'm okay. I'm just recording. I have to warn my neighbors not to call the police. But video games, I sometimes I'm sweating and you're like, huh, yeah, ha, and you have to take damage, and so you are physically doing it. And
I was just going to say that must be very tiring. It must be very physically tiring. Oh my goodness
sake! Yeah.
And what kind of characters do you? Can you give us examples of the kinds of characters you might do in video games?
It's interesting. I still do a lot of little girls. Like I was in Metal Gear Solid 4, where I play Sunny, and she's a young girl, and so I played a younger, and I didn't get to fight in that. She cooked eggs, and but there are other ones.
So you were flipping eggs. You were like, flipping eggs like that. Big eggs.
Take that, eggs.
Yeah, I'm gonna beat you.
Yeah, exactly. So she was more of a homemaker figure.
She was just a little girl cooking eggs on a spaceship or a flight, and but she was also a genius and would invent all kinds of gadgets.
Christina was indeed a delight. She's just full of life and full of energy, which is what you need, I guess, if you're doing voices for cartoon characters, John.
Well, she was nothing but energy, and you could really feel that coming through the microphone. You can see why she's really good at voiceovers. She not only inhabits her characters, which you're supposed to do if you're a good actor, but she reaches out and she makes you part of the whole thing. It was really fun to hear all that, just in the way that she represents herself, and in that, I don't want to say perky, but it is a perky voice. It's really energetic, and it just comes at you with all the fun you could imagine.
We want to also point out some other multiple appearances, people who have done repeat appearances on the Innertube. John's buddy Art Kaplan has come on at least 4 or 5 times to talk about COVID and keep us updated on that. Corey Hutchison, who is big on folklore, has come on and talked to us about all the big holidays: Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas.
Very entertaining.
And Sweeney Murdy, who is a guy who works with WFAN Radio New York and works very closely with the Yankees, has come on a couple of times to talk about one of John and my favorite topics, and that is baseball.
He's so wonderful because he's sort of like a little kid in a candy shop. He loves sports, but I think most of all, he has this deep love for the national pastime, which you and I share, Don. We've been to a lot of baseball games together. And Sweeney really knows all about it. He's very, very knowledgeable. And even if you're not a baseball fan, you can get a kick out of listening to baseball fans talk about things like statistics and personalities and great games and what they meant to the country. There have been a lot of games that have really invigorated entire cities. I can tell you that happened when the Phillies won in 2008. That World Series victory really sort of gave a kick in the pants to Philly, which has been exploding ever since. And but there's really lots of great examples of baseball as a way to be happy, and be encouraged about where things are going. I got that from Sweeney. It was great.
Definitely. And if you'd like to listen to Sweeney, he's on episodes 29 and 42 of the Musical Innertube.
I think we could talk about our old friend Matt Kaplan for a minute, because he's been on a couple of times, and we had Matt come on to talk about planetary issues, and that's good because he's the host and producer of the syndicated radio program Planetary Radio. It's all about space, astronomy, exploration, and aliens. And in the short clip that we'll finish with, he has a little thing to talk about with the pros and the big cons of reaching out and trying to be heard by distant civilizations.
Yeah, before we get to those short clips, just real quickly, also, I want to mention a couple of friends of mine that we talked to. I went through college and came out and am hosting a podcast and did a little goofy stuff on radio and television. But these guys have really, really done big. I went to college with both of them. They both got much better jobs than I did out of college. And that was Tad Stones and Chick Russell. Tad worked for Disney for a while and created Darkwing Duck. And Chick Russell worked for Disney as well, but then he also went to work for Universal. And he has created the dark rides, including the Harry Potter ride that is currently
And I had never heard I'd never heard the distinction between dark rides, which basically take place indoors so that there could be lights and effects.
Yes, and he does an excellent job at it. And if you want to hear Chick, he's episode 37. Tad is way back at episode 3.
Both fascinating.
Yes. Well, as we flush 2021 and take 2022 out of the oven, we'll close with some clips of high points throughout the year. And we want to thank Bruce Betts of the Planetary Society, lifestyle guru Jill Shearer Murray, amusement park designer Chick Russell, who we were just talking about, Jill Weissensee Egan, who was talking about Bill Cosby, TV critic Ellen Gray, folklorist Corey Hutchinson, who we mentioned earlier, and another early mention, Disney guy Tad Stones, and of course, our starry-eyed futurist Matt Kaplan. Listen to all of these people do a little bit, just to give you an idea, a little bit of spice and flavor of what we've been talking about here on the Musical Innertube for 50 episodes. And here's to 51, John.
You betcha, baby. Sure.
Why do we need a helicopter flying on Mars?
We need a helicopter on Mars for traffic reports primarily, especially with all these rovers.
I went went to see a shaman because I was struggling with some like body image issues because I'm the only woman in the world that has that problem. And she basically told me that I needed to write down on a piece of paper something like, I am an earth mother. I am a beautiful woman. You know, in the moment I was like, okay, this is silly. But, you know, I paid good money for that shaman. So, you know, I came home. I wrote out the whole list.
You fly up over Hogwarts Castle behind Harry, and as you go over, you know, a giant dragon attacks you in the air, and then you hurtle down over a Quidditch match. And, you know, I said, okay, so here's the script. What ride system we're going to use? They looked it over and said, well, you know, we realize now that what you wrote here, there is no right system that can do all this stuff.
There were these modeling agencies that were feeding him a steady supply of women. He called their agents, and their agent said, I want to mentor so-and-so, and their agents called them. Some were models. There were 2 modeling agencies that were just feeding him a steady supply of victims, one of which was sending them to him while he was filming The Cosby Show in Queens, New York for the entire time.
Adam Goldberg has done something that almost no one has ever done, which was to get to use real names. Lawyers hate real names.
They advise you never to do it.
What Adam does on the Goldbergs, he'd go to people and get them to sign releases. I once spoke to the Rotary Club in Jenkintown, and before I started, I asked people to raise their hands if they'd ever been mentioned on the Goldbergs or knew somebody who'd been mentioned on the Goldbergs, and every hand in the room went up.
They had waterfowl, a great store of wild turkeys, venison, meal, which would be just sort of grain, what they called Indian corn as well. So turkey is right there. It's right there at the first Thanksgiving, but it's one of so many things that's being prepared. So I guess you could really say that the tradition that's established there is overeating.
The show didn't click until we added an adopted daughter, Goslin, because that was the heart of the show. Because ultimately, looking back on it, we said it's basically, what if Batman had a little girl who refused to stay at home? And that was her, and that's what sold the show.
Everything that we do, radio and television, goes out on the radio waves out into the void. And of course the theory of that is that one of these extraterrestrials picks it up and comes and follows that and comes and finds us. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, it is. And there is a raging argument about this. There are people like the great late Stephen Hawking who said we should keep our mouths shut, because, you know, the Klingons may catch an I Love Lucy and come here and take over.
We are Phenorks. We hate Lucille Ball. If we hear Lucille Ball one more time, we obliterate your planet.
And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube for part or all of the last 50 episodes. If you'd like to get in touch with us, just send us an email. The address is musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com. And we're on Twitter @MInnertube, capitalize the M and I. Our webpage is Musical Innertube, that's musical spelled with 2 A's, .libsyn, spelled LIBSYN.com. We're posted on Facebook, Apple iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, iHeart Podcasts, Amazon Music, and Audible. Like us and give us a good review on any of those platforms. And as always, thanks to the virtual band Car Radio Dog for our theme music.